presenters about how rooftops can be pollinator habitat. And I'm going to start with a few NOFA housekeeping slides. So I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see the slide?
Yep.
Okay. Welcome. I'm Renee Scott. I am the nofamass Pollinator Network Coordinator and your host for this evening, and I'm delighted to have everyone here. And welcome to the summer conference. We're going to start with a land acknowledgement. This conference is presented on land that has been stewarded by Indigenous people since before European colonization. And as we work to heal the destruction caused by colonization, we appreciate your support, solidarity, and continued learning. And if you would like to learn more about land acknowledgements, David is going to drop a link in the chat and you can explore. It's interesting, very interesting. So recommend taking a look. We also have a couple things we want to point out about the conference in person coming up on Saturday. It's this Saturday, July 29th. And we hope everyone can join us in person, although you can also join us online. We have some caucus groups. We have the BIPOC caucus and we have the White Ally caucus. And those are both going to be happening 12:45 to 1:45 at Worcester State University. We are also centering racial equity in our work, and we're hoping you do that in your own community to protect the rights of farm and farm workers, and so you can support legislation to advance the work towards reparations, support BIPOC-led organizations. And these are some of the organizations in our region that are doing this work already, and we recommend that you explore. And if there are some we're missing, let us know. We can add them to our list of contacts. And we wanted to thank our sponsors, our partner level sponsors, for that we could not do this conference without. So if you have an opportunity to support these organizations, these businesses, we encourage you to. They've helped us, and they're all wonderful organizations and businesses. We have another feature of our conference is you can have your soil looked at. And we have our experts who will be there. You can bring a sample. It'll be running most of the day. There will be some breaks, but please check it out. It's going to be fascinating to learn what's going on in your own soil. So information should be on the screen here. And we also have an auction that has some really wonderful things to bid on. And David's going to drop the link to the auction, it's online auction, in the chat. And we encourage you to take a look and bid on some of the really neat things that have been offered up. So with no further ado, I am going to turn it over to Pete Ellis and to Emily Ahlstedt, who are both Recover Green Roof employees and have a really great presentation for us. So Pete, Emily.
Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
Great. So hey everyone, good evening and welcome. My name is Pete Ellis, and as Renee mentioned, I'm joined by fellow Recover Green Roof colleague Emily Ahlstedt. And tonight we're going to be talking about green roofs and their role as urban habitat creators and pollinator gardens. So before we begin, I want to give a shout out to Renee. Thank you for the invitation to speak. As well as the whole NOFA team for all their amazing work, both with this conference and beyond. So today's talk is entitled Rooftop Pollinator Parade, Green Roofs and Their Role as Urban Habitat Creators. So Recover Green Roofs is an outfit based in Somerville, Mass, and we specialize in the design, installation, maintenance of green roofs and rooftop farms. And we've been at this for nearly 13 years and have installed hundreds of thousands of square feet of green roofs and rooftop farms throughout New England and beyond. This is our team, and the team is really a committed group of designers, ecologists, builders, horticulturists, managers, artists, and advocates, all with a shared love for green roofs. And this photo was taken at our office in Somerville, Massachusetts. So as I said, I'm going to be joined tonight by Emily Ahlstedt, who leads the Recover Horticulture and Maintenance Department, and who is also featured in this video, which you're now seeing. Emily, you here?
Thanks, Pete. Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here today presenting alongside Pete. Just a little bit about my background. I've been involved professionally in horticulture now for about 12 years, and the last 5 of those being exclusively on rooftops. I currently manage the maintenance accounts at Recover, which consist of over 120 uniquely different rooftop gardens. I feel challenged and fulfilled every day as we strive to maximize the way all of these roofs look and perform. I've realized the potential for these spaces as habitats for pollinators and how important that is, especially within our cities. I'll be talking later on in this presentation about a project case study where we really transformed one of our roofs to allow for more of these habitats. And for those of you familiar with Cambridge, the roof that I'm maintaining here on this video is on Harvard Ave between Central and Harvard Square. Here I'm mostly weeding through the sedum, but also thinning it out to encourage more flowering. And as you saw, as it zoomed out, it's mostly a sedum extensive roof, except for the 2 deeper beds along the railings on each side of the deck. And that's sort of a spot on a roof like this where we have more flexibility with plant selections. Right now, you would have seen that it was larger grasses mixed in to these areas that are about 1 foot deep.
Thanks, Emily. So my professional background, just to give a little intro to myself, spans a few different disciplines. And prior to joining Recover in 2011, I came from the world of design, fabrication, the arts, and agriculture. And so working with Recover was really an opportunity to bring a lot of these interests together. And after 12 years, I have been on many, many rooftops and have really grown super fond of green roofs and rooftop farms. So within Recover, I specialize in the development of special projects, a lot of work with hospitals, rooftop farms, educational institutions, and I also do a lot of outreach and policy work, as well as education events like this. And these days, unfortunately, I don't get my hands as dirty as I once did, but I try to get up on our roofs as much as I can. In addition to my work with Recover, I'm also an advisor to the City of Boston's Grow Boston, the Office of Urban Agriculture, where I support the office around themes of rooftop agriculture and green infrastructure more broadly. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Mayor Wu, but the current administration is very committed to the integration of more green space in the city, which includes urban agriculture. And I'm super excited about the prospect of some of that green space being above our heads on our roofs. So tonight's talk is going to touch on a few different themes, starting with these introductions, and then we're going to be following up with a green infrastructure 101, like given the basics, moving on to a green roofs basics, diving into what green roofs are, dissecting green roofs a little bit. And then we're going to be looking at green roofs as biodiversity tools, really how we can leverage green roofs to improve biodiversity in our built environments. And then we're going to be talking about Amherst College Science Center, which is an image that's pictured in this photo right here. This is actually on I think the 6th floor of the Science Center. This is overlooking the Amherst College campus out in Amherst, Mass. So as many of you may guess, our name's Recover, and Recover takes on a few different meanings within the context of our work. So beyond the obvious reference to rooftops and our commitment to recovering lost or degraded landscapes, the name Recover was actually also inspired by the book Recovering America, which was written by the visionary architect, author, and cartoonist Malcolm Wells, who wrote this book in the late 90s. He passed away in the early 2000s. And Wells was a native of Cape Cod and a pioneer in the earth shelter or earthen home movement. And he really was an advocate for shifting our perspective in how we think about and design our built environment, and really was a proponent of building with rather than against nature. As you can see from some of the images here, these are some of his sketches. And this perspective really deeply aligns with the mission of Recover, and we strive to continue evolving and growing with this mission as we evolve and grow as a company. In this slide, you can see a few of Malcolm's sketches, and there's a few actually in the background as well. And he incorporated green roofs into a lot of his buildings and designs, including an underground art gallery that's in Brewster, Mass. And still in use today, even after his passing. And if you're interested in sort of earth shelters, earth dwellings, or sort of unusual green roofs, I definitely would recommend checking out Malcolm's work. Super interesting and really an inspiring character. Before we get into green roofs specifically, I wanted to zoom out for a second and take a few moments to think about green infrastructure, which is really the umbrella term under which green roofs are situated. Often when I tell people that I work in the field of green infrastructure, they immediately assume that I work with solar panels or renewable energy, or sort of something in that realm. And while that's totally understandable, it couldn't really be farther from the truth. So what is green infrastructure? A lot of people think about it in a lot of different ways. I tend to lean on this pretty open definition that the European Union put together, which is a strategically planned network of natural and semi-natural areas with other environmental features designed and managed to deliver a wide range of ecosystem services while also enhancing biodiversity. So another way of putting that is that green infrastructure is the incorporation of nature into our built environment with the goal of providing ecosystem services or the positive impacts and contributions ecosystems have on humans, as well as biodiversity and habitat creation. And I also think that it's important that when we think about the end goals of green infrastructure, that we think inclusively about what biodiversity really means, with the ultimate goal of fostering a functional biodiversity. So like a real functional biodiversity for both the obvious flora and fauna that we often think about, but also things for like fungi or microflora and fauna that are really necessary for healthy and sustainable ecosystems, and in particular soil. So there's a lot of types of green infrastructure, and especially given what's going on right now, I encourage all of you to do some reading if you're interested in exploring the topic in more detail. And although today we're definitely going to be focused on green roofs, I thought it would be helpful to give a quick overview of some of the different types of green infrastructure, just to give a place to sort of start the conversation. And a good place to start having that conversation is this image, which is the SEC building at the Harvard School of Engineering and Applied Science. So this building is in Ahlstedt, across the street from the business school. And the SEC building is a new building that has incorporated a number of important green infrastructure elements, such as water harvesting, which you can't see, but it's actually underground here. There's large storage tanks for water harvesting. We have a ton of green space in this building. So this is all part of the building, both the green roofs and the ground level green space. We have a ton of tree planters throughout the space. So you can see some over here, some along the streets here. We have engineered wetlands in this building, which is really cool. And so we have an engineered wetland system, which actually starts in this area and then makes its way down here and then ending up in this small wetland area here. We have permeable pavers. So basically hardscaping pavers that allow water to percolate through them rather than sheet off them, which allows for better water infiltration on the ground. And then of course we have green roofs. And this building was actually designed by Danish architects. And what's really cool about it is that it's sort of one closed loop of a green infrastructure system. So all of these types of green infrastructure elements are all working together on this building. A few other examples are green walls. And this is a super interesting, to me, a super interesting wild green wall, a photo I took in Berlin, Germany. And then rain gardens, which are definitely one of my favorite ways to incorporate green infrastructure and biodiversity within our cities. And also a great way to capture and manage stormwater. You can see this is actually after a rainstorm on this rain garden. And the rain gardens are being flooded with water that's moving from the impervious surfaces of the sidewalks into the rain garden, which is then feeding the rain garden with water. This is actually a nice diagram of how a rain garden works. So we have a few examples of green infrastructure, and then the question is, so why do we need green infrastructure? And I think there's a lot going on with the environment right now that kind of leads to that answer. In this slide, you can see several recent photos of flooding within the New England area. We have a recent photo from Waterbury, Vermont in the upper left. We have some photos of Union Square in Somerville from a storm a few years back. Some photos from Cambridge and Somerville here. And we also have a video from an overwhelmed dam in Western Mass, which was taken a couple of weeks back. This is not supposed to look like this. And what all of these photos have in common is really the lack of stormwater management within our cities or built environments. And one of the major roles of green infrastructure is to provide a tool for stormwater management. Another thing that green infrastructure is really good at doing is mitigating the effects of combined sewer overflow. And if any of you are unaware of that term or that concept, definitely worth familiarizing yourself with, especially if you live in the Boston area. Because in older cities such as Boston, the sewer system is what is called a combined sewer overflow. And what that means is that the same pipes that are used to manage wastewater are also the same pipes that are used to manage stormwater. And this is really illustrated pretty well in this image right here. And foundationally, what happens with this system is that when you have a large rain event, the water from sewage and the water from stormwater all end up in the same pipes. And those pipes become inundated with water. They're unable to function with that capacity. And so in those cases, there's actually an overflow valve that pumps that water out into typically a body of water to sort of release the tension within these pipes. And unfortunately, a lot of cities in the world have this. A lot of cities in the US have that, especially the older cities. And in a city like Boston, this overflow valve actually ends up in places like Boston Harbor, the Charles River, Mystic River. And we've done a lot in the city to improve that, but it's still, there still are these overflow valves, and they still do emit sewage, semi-treated sewage during rain events. And one thing that green infrastructure does is it helps reduce the amount of water that makes its way into these combined sewer overflow systems, thus alleviating the pressure. And what that means is that we have less water in these systems and therefore less water that's being run off into these waterways. This is actually a current map of the combined sewer overflow system in Boston area. And take a look online if you want to take a look at this more closely, but it just shows the new overflow valves, the ones that have been closed, the ones that have been retrofit, et cetera, et cetera. But kind of what the takeaway is that we still have this system in the city of Boston, and green infrastructure is a great way to help alleviate the strain on that system. Another big issue within our cities is urban heat islands. And because of the way that our cities and infrastructure have historically been designed and built, they absorb and retain a ton of heat, significantly more than in areas with less density, more green space, such as forests, meadows, parklands, the suburbs, the rural areas. And this is really because our cities generate a tremendous amount of heat during the day and also at night. and also that the materials of our cities absorb a ton of heat in the sun during the day and then hold onto that heat and radiate it back out into the city at night. And for most of us in the world, I'm actually calling from Vienna, Austria at the moment, visiting some family. The last few weeks were very hot and in many places dangerously hot. And a core function of green infrastructure is to lower that urban heat island. This is a nice diagram of what that kind of looked like with a temperature scale. And while this is a sort of a generic detail, what you can see is that in the areas that are very rural or less dense parklands, it's much lower temperature. And then in the downtown area, as we get the hottest, and sort of you get out into the commercial areas, into the suburbs, it's still much higher than in the rural areas. So core function is lowering that urban heat island, and this is done through providing shade, which is a great way to lower that heat, and also through a process of evapotranspiration, which is essentially like the sweating process of soil and plants, which is much like our own sweating process, cooling down the plants in the surrounding environments. It's a combination of evapotranspiration, so evaporation, which is water evaporating from the soil, which cools things down, and transpiration, which is the plants letting off water, which also cools them down. So one thing that's kind of worth noting is that this is a map of Boston. It's a heat map. And what you can really see here is that areas where there's little or sparse coverage or green coverage, such as the seaports, Chinatown, South Boston, parts of Dorchester and Roxbury, especially Somerville, it's very hot. But areas that have a lot of green, it's much cooler, such as the Boston Commons, the Emerald Necklace, and of course, as you get out into the suburbs. And then really the loss of green space and biodiversity, definitely a dire and sort of existential issue for all of us. And each year as our cities get bigger and hotter and more robust, we lose precious green space and biodiversity. And this image is from Midtown New York. And from what I can see, there's actually no green space in this image, let alone biodiversity or habitat potential. You got pavement, stone, concrete on all sides, and all of which are impervious surfaces that really exacerbate the stormwater management issues, increase flooding, increase urban heat island, and so on. And really in this block, in Midtown, we can incorporate so many elements of green infrastructure, all of which would improve the livability of the city. Some of those things could be green roofs, green walls, street planters, rain gardens, etc. And then kind of continuing on the theme of impervious surfaces, so surfaces that are not porous, that sheet water off, that move water off rather than let water percolate through them. This is really a problem that we can address very well with green infrastructure. And this is sort of a slide showing the difference between an impervious city versus a pervious city. And you can see how on the left, all the water sheets to one area, basically the lowest point, which obviously causes a lot of flooding. And then the image on the right, the water is much better managed on site where it falls. And so we have things like green roofs, again, rain gardens, permeable surfaces for parking, et cetera. And all of those things are stacking benefits, benefits that are green infrastructure, helping deal and manage stormwater, all at the same time promoting biodiversity through growing plants, trees, vegetables, et cetera. So to wrap up on green infrastructure, I wanted to kind of point out that each green infrastructure type has its place and role, and it's really up to our city planners to start thinking about them as tools that can be deployed throughout our cities to make them more resilient and livable, sort of determining where and when each type of tool can be implemented and deployed. And really what I love so much about green roofs is that they can serve so many functions in helping to improve resiliency, sustainability, and the health of our cities and planet. And what's better yet is that we have millions and millions of buildings in our cities and towns, all of which have roofs that are currently underutilized and just waiting for green roofs to activate their green infrastructure potential. And so really at whatever size, these roofs can help us manage our stormwater, They can cool our cities. They can help reduce noise pollution. They can clean our air. They can foster biodiversity. And of course, they can create habitat for pollinators. And just to kind of end on this note, this is actually a roof in downtown Boston, which is actually the old Filene's basement building, now called the Burnham Building. So just to give a few basics on what green roofs are. Some of you may already know this, but hopefully this will kind of give you a better understanding of what goes into a green roof. This image is of a slide of the Whole Foods Linfield rooftop farm, which is looking really beautiful at sunset. I'm not going to get too deep into the specifics of green roof components. They're actually quite simple, but there's a lot of different kind of variations, subtle variations and differences. But this is sort of an image. This is an image of a generic green roof cross section. And I'm going to start from the bottom up, but at the bottom we have waterproofing. So that's above your roof, making sure there's no water going into your building. And then above that, we have a root barrier, which provides root protection so that roots don't penetrate into your waterproofing. So this is a root-proof material. And then above that, we have a drainage layer, which helps to allow water to flow under your green roof system, but also, as equally as important, provides a lot of aeration for your green roof, allowing for gaseous transfer within your green roof system. And then above that, we have a filter fabric, which can be used to separate the drainage layer from the soil layer, alleviating any issues with fine particulate clogging your drainage layer. And then we have our growing media, or substrate, or a soil. Different places call green roof media different things. Recover tends to call it green roof media. And green roof media is really sort of an engineered growing media, an engineered soil, which is really designed for weight, for aeration, for density, etc. It's really sort of a green roof specific soil. And it's something it's usually engineered. And then above that, we have our vegetation, and depending on the roof type, the roof size, the roof depth, this could really vary from anything from low growth succulents to large trees. Green roofs definitely come in many shapes and sizes, many variations, and they can be shallow as a few inches. There's sort of this extensive style green roof on the left, to as deep as 3 or more feet, which is something like this on the right. And this is an intensive green roof. We have an extensive green roof, which is the real shallow, and then we have a semi-intensive green roof in the middle. So all green roofs of many shapes and sizes, a lot of potential. And really it's sort of, again, it's sort of a tool, how you utilize it, what sort of constraints you have with your building. As you can imagine, this is a much heavier green roof than this, and some roofs can only support this weight, others can support this. But really what you can do with your roof is going to be heavily dependent on the style of green roof you're able to install. So to help give a sense of what green roofs look like in real life, sort of in the context of New England, the next few slides should give you sort of a general overview. And this is a slide of a roof that I installed in downtown Boston about 6 years ago. And I really like to share these images because the image on the upper left is the roof before it was greened. So you can see here it's just one big gray monolithic roof. It's concrete roof, devoid of life. And then below that, we have kind of the middle stage of the green roof system being installed. And this green roof soil is actually being blown into place by this large tube, which is kind of a reverse vacuum. And then we have the finished roof on the right, which is just starting to bloom. And this particular roof is a very low profile, extensive style green roof, so about 4 inches of media. And the plant palette on this roof is primarily hardy succulents. And this building is really interesting because every few years, the building seems to install a new green roof on one of their new levels. So I think, Emily, if you could chime in, I think we have maybe 4 or 5 different levels of green roofs on this building outside of Copley Square. Is that right?
Yep, there's 4, and then one of them being almost like a 360 wraparound sedum bed, which is just 4 feet wide. It's our tallest roof.
20th floor, 19th floor, something very high.
20th.
20th floor. Yeah, super cool. And then this is a really nice image of the recently completed Brooklyn Grange rooftop farm, which is on the Javits Center in Manhattan. And this roof is a super deep profile green roof with areas ranging from 14 inches to 3+ feet in depth, which is, as you imagine, super heavy. But this building was actually designed specifically for this green roof. And this roof is really a stunning example of biodiversity. We have over 150,000 square feet of farm rows. We have a food forest. We have a native perennial garden. We have ornamental gardens. We have a shade garden. And all of this is within the context of some sitting areas for people that are using the space. So it's really sort of a nice integrated space that showcases a lot of different styles of green roofs and the ability to transform gray infrastructure into really lush urban greenery. And then this video was actually taken above the roof crop farm in Chicago. And it's a really nice example of sort of a permaculture style rooftop farm that serves as a green oasis within a pretty dense concrete landscape. And I really love how they have integrated so many perennials, which you can see in these videos, into the farm landscape. So this is both a production space and sort of a wild space. Definitely one of the most beautiful rooftop farms that I'm aware of. And then to round things off, this is kind of a small residential rooftop farm in Cambridge, Mass. And I really just love this because of its sort of playful wildness. This roof was designed by a local architect, Sebastian Mariscal Studios, which is based in Somerville and Mexico City. It's definitely an urban oasis. And this design team really wanted to allow for nature to do its thing, nature to sort of be allowed to create and make its own course. As you can see, we have this really, really wild vines. There's some shade gardens below. And then if you were to zoom out of this building, you would really see that this whole house is sort of covered in greenery. And when we're up there maintaining, you can really see it's abuzz with pollinators and a huge diversity of flora and fauna. So a quick review, green roof basics, green roof types. We have green roofs are living landscapes above structure. They're a type of green infrastructure. Basic components, not going to read through these, but feel free to take a picture of these images. We have a few different types of green roofs, really three main types: the extensive, the semi-intensive. The intensive, the weight of the system is something that, especially if you're a designer or interested in getting involved in design, where installing a green roof, the weight of the system is really important. They can really range wildly from really low weights to very high weights, depending on the depth. We can get from low growth succulents to hardwood trees. Tons of benefits. These are just a few of them: stormwater management, reduced urban heat island, increased biodiversity, habitat creation, connectivity. That's something that's really important with green roofs. They can improve air quality, reduce noise pollution, habitat for pollinators, pollinate, so many different benefits. We could kind of go on all night with that, but really just here's some basics. And moving on. I mentioned this earlier, but I really want to reiterate this point. I think I mentioned this earlier, that when we think about green roofs, it's really important to think about them as a tool, and really a tool in a much larger and diverse toolbox of green infrastructure. And as our cities increase in size and density, the loss of green space accelerates. This is going to become ever more relevant. And so this domino effect of losing green space, more impermeable spaces, its domino effect had a negative effect on humans and local ecologies. And green roofs really provide a wide range of benefits to help alleviate some of these strains. And so the following slides are really going to be thinking about green roofs as a tool for biodiversity and habitat creation. We can kind of go into all of the other benefits and how it improves and helps with cities to mitigate the negative effects of climate change, as well as so many environmental factors. But really, we're going to be focusing on biodiversity and habitat and sort of thinking about green roofs as a tool for that. And so to really address these problems from a solution-oriented perspective, we got to develop a holistic strategy that both conserves our existing natural resources as well as incorporates new green space whenever possible. So from my perspective, conservation efforts within our cities, rural areas, and wilderness should really be a priority. And then incorporating dense, interconnected green roof spaces, green walls, and ground level green infrastructure within our planned built environments is sort of the secondary thing. So the reason I say this is because sometimes green roofs, green walls, and green infrastructure is used to justify sort of the destruction of ground level greenery. And I really believe that green roofs should be sort of supplementary to conservation efforts, and green roofs really support and connect our green spaces within our cities. And green roofs as connected elements sort of within the web of our planetary ecology is something that I find really important. And this image is kind of take a look online if you're interested. This is one of the largest rooftop farms in the world. It's in Bangkok. It's Thammasat University. And it is a stunning example of sort of water cycles on green roofs and utilizing green roofs to create just spectacular urban connected spaces. So I definitely recommend taking a look at this project. It's really stunning. And so kind of thinking about that interconnectedness with green space within the built environment, there's a lot of ways to think about this. And I'm sure that many of you as farmers or people that are kind of involved in gardening or the organic movement are familiar with the importance of interconnected green space, be it in a rural or urban context. But at its core, the basic concept is that the ecosystem functions better when interconnected. And this is really could be at a large scale, such as like sort of conserving a wetland or around a large body of water, or at a smaller scale, such as utilizing a green roof to provide sort of a connection point for insects and pollinators between two urban parks or a series or string of urban parks. And so just to kind of illustrate that in sort of a unique way, this image is actually of a land bridge, which is a type of green roof. And I'm not sure if any of you have seen these in person. They're quite stunning to look at if you're ever able to see one. And really amazing pieces of infrastructure that were designed to connect previously human-imposed isolated landscapes on either side of a roadway, typically a highway. And so one reason I'm showing this slide is that this in itself kind of illustrates how green roofs can provide connectivity for habitats, insects, and animals, but also kind of thinking about this as sort of a metaphor for green infrastructure more broadly. And so, as we know, our landscapes are complex and depend on sort of a delicate diversity of flora and fauna. And then when those landscapes are artificially isolated, be it by a roadway or a city, they really tend to suffer. And so by designing for connectivity rather than isolation, we really strengthen our ecosystems by recreating opportunities for connection. So that's really important. It's like recreating opportunities for connections where we've imposed isolation. So this land bridge really connects two landscapes that were previously fluid prior to the highway and then were cut off, now re-allowing for animals and insects to pass freely from one side to the other. And this not only benefits the animals and insects, but the whole food web, as we see that, bringing back flora and fauna between the two, transfer of seeds, plant materials, microorganisms, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really important for that connectivity. And then if you contrast that with this image, again, sort of thinking about this literally, but also metaphorically, we have some pockets of green space, unconnected, and sort of the difficulty with getting from one space to the other across the highway, especially for animals. And you can see that the freedom of movement is severely reduced and definitely has some negative consequences on the ecological systems. And so sort of in the same way that animal bridges connect natural landscapes, green roofs and green infrastructure connect nature within our cities and our built environments. And while this connectivity is important in many reasons, really provides pollinators with food and habitat throughout the built environment, not sort of just in one pocket, so that you can jump around and have pathways and cycles. And so what are the best practices we should really be thinking about when we want to foster this biodiversity and this pollinator habitat within our green roofs? So we're going to definitely kind of dive into that now. So the first is probably pretty obvious, but fundamentally, we know that a black rubber roof like this, which is actually the roof of the Boston Medical Center power plant, is not going to support any pollinators, not going to support any habitat. All it's really going to do is absorb heat and protect the building from water. And then if we were to zoom out from that same building, which is actually that roof was right here, you can see that the area surrounding this power plant is also devoid of green space. There's a few little green patches here, some lawn space here, a few trees here. But overwhelmingly, what we're seeing is concrete jungle. And so now both of these images were taken in 2016. But if we were to fast forward to the spring of 2017, you would see this, which is Boston Medical Center's first rooftop farm, which is a green roof, situated on the same empty black rubber roof that was shunning life a few years before. And I don't think it really takes an entomologist or ecologist to understand that this green roof provides significantly more pollinator habitat than the bare roof. And even though it's still kind of this green island within the landscape, it's definitely a 7,000 square feet of green space that provides an oasis and home and stopping off point for millions of insects and pollinators each year, also for many, many birds throughout the season. And so beyond the obvious that green roofs are better than rubber roofs or empty roofs for the creation of pollinator habitat, how else can we ensure that we are designing and building green roofs that maximize biodiversity and pollinator habitat? So we can see here in this slide that there are so many amazing opportunities to foster biodiversity on our green roofs, from microflora to fauna. And when I think about pollinators, I tend to think about them as sort of like part of the larger web. And we need to support the full holistic web to support the pollinators. And so when we plan for a functional green roof that supports a robust green roof ecosystem, as well as the pollinators, we also need to think about things like providing habitat for nesting birds, for things like soil microbes. We've got some bacteria and some nematodes. We've got small invertebrates, we've got some snakes, predators, moths, beetles. All of these are fairly common on our green roofs. And then, of course, pollinators. So overarchingly, what I'm trying to get at is kind of twofold, and that is really to best utilize our roofs for pollinator habitat and support biodiversity. We really need connected green roof space. And then we need green roof spaces that are designed and managed to support that biodiversity and those pollinator habitats. And this slide is an image of definitely one of my favorite roofs, which is at the University of Hartford. And this roof is a great example of a green roof that was designed to both connect with the surrounding landscape as well as support biodiversity. And when you look at this roof from the side, you can see that the roof slopes up from the right to left. And that if you're standing over in this far corner of the campus and we're looking up, it would appear that the roof is actually sort of an extension of the hillside, rising up from the lawn area. And this was an intentional design feature, and it both serves to visually and functionally connect the roof with the ground level greenery. As you can see, you're kind of sloping up in this image as the drone flies over. And you can see how many flowers are in bloom right now. This is sort of the end of the season, but throughout this season, this roof is constantly abloom, and attracting pollinators and birds throughout the season. And just to kind of give an example of a few of the flowers that are up on the roof. This roof was designed by Omni Ecosystems Chicago. I bring them up just because they're sort of an exemplary member of the green roof community. And over the years, they've been doing a ton of research on developing unique green roof soil systems that can support a huge range of flora and fauna while minimizing soil weight and depth. So this roof, for example, I just think it's amazing. This is a roof that's only 5 or 6 inches in soil depth, but you can grow 10-foot sunflowers and foot-long daikon radishes on this roof and support probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of insects on this roof. This is about 24,000 square feet, so a sizable green roof. But one thing that's really unique about this group Omni Ecosystem is that they're really committed to microbial health of the soil, and definitely the sort of important symbiotic relationship between the soil, microbial community, and the plants and the fauna. And why I'm saying that is just, again, it's really important to think about, encouraging pollinators through encouraging sort of the holistic system and really having that holistic approach to functional biodiversity. Now I'm going to hand it over to Emily to chat about Amherst College Science Center.
Perfect. All right, so yeah, jumping into our project case study example, as Pete mentioned earlier on, showing that photo from the beginning, This is a green roof that's on top of Amherst Science Center at Amherst College in Amherst, Mass, where we've added immense biodiversity to increase pollinator habitats. The original installation was completed in June of 2018, and it's one big rectangle, 3,200 square feet. It's 12 inches deep, and we originally planted it with sedum plugs only. No sedum mats were used at all. And the reason for plugs was so that we could select species acclimated to our hardiness zone, which all came from Emery Knoll Farms out of Maryland. All roofs can support biodiversity beyond sedum, but this particular roof was able to support an extreme amount of biodiversity due to the depth. And the reason for that 12-inch depth design originally was, which is not typical of a sedum roof, was to maximize the amount of stormwater capture. So what started as a simple sedum intensive planted with all plugs was transformed last May of 2022. What we saw was the potential to capture much more than just that stormwater. Continuing with the history of the roof. So as you can see here, the plugs were planted at a high density of 4 to, in some areas, 5 per square foot to minimize the weed pressure. But as it turned out, it didn't matter because we still had significant weed pressure given that depth. Obviously, the deeper the soil, the stronger the weeds. And they really intensified when Amherst College didn't sign a maintenance contract for 2020 and part of 2021 due to COVID and complicated building access. I'm sure this issue was bound to happen anyway, with weed seeds being blown in from the surrounding campus and ground level, but this sort of neglect really accelerated the situation. So once we made our way up there, which was in summer of 2021, we were up against a sea of weeds. It was nearly 90% coverage, rabbit's foot clover being the most prolific, and a very common but invasive weed, black medic. We ended up with all of these weeds for the 3 big reasons. One being the sedum wasn't diverse enough, the roof was neglected for that period of time, and of course the depth. The weed coverage that you see in this photo is actually one of the worst that I've ever seen. Just sort of seeing rooftops for the last 5 years and being a part of many maintenance trips to different roofs. When we got up through the roof hatch and saw this one, we were definitely shocked. And unfortunately, because of all this, the seed bank is something that we're going to be battling for a while. So obviously weeding like this is something that can often be overwhelming. With proper timing and being able to stay on top of it with many visits, we are slowly reducing that seed bed by a bit. But the main takeaway from all of this is that we also saw it as an opportunity and our big push to transform the roof into something different. With approval from the university, Amherst College, we were able to make this happen. And May of 2022 began the remediation. The goal was to reduce the weeds with more annual visits, but also to use this depth to create a sedum meadow with taller perennials, more color, which is ultimately increasing biodiversity, interest, habitat, and visual appeal. So we started off by going in, clearing a lot of areas out that were just so covered in rabbit's foot and black medic. In those spots that were the worst, we got down to bare media. We created a path up the middle for ease of access, and we worked with a substantial budget to add many different flowering and native species throughout. So here's an early on after photo. You can see some asters, native grasses, and black-eyed Susans starting to establish themselves. And here is a more recent after photo to show you the different varieties and textures throughout. The left photo you can see are some sunflowers. Every spring we actually have been seeding sunflowers up there, well, since the remediation, and we go with different varying heights. Some dwarf varieties, medium, and then obviously like the huge ones. So those ones are not really flowering there, but there's birds that nest on the side of this building. So we often see them eating the seeds, and we leave all of the dead seed pod flowers up for the winter so that the birds are able to sort of feed throughout the winter months. Examples of other species. So here's blazing star on the left and then northern sea oats on the right. We enjoyed taking advantage of this available soil depth by adding larger 1 to 3 to 5 gallon pots, as well as different meadow seeds and sun plugs. Visiting local nurseries and the Native Plant Trust whenever possible for some sourcing. Blazing star is attractive to all pollinators, and certainly the monarch butterfly. While northern sea oats are not a top pollinator option, but we're still seeing caterpillars and butterflies enjoy their existence. Other plants that are thriving up there include penstemon, asters, goldenrod, columbine, rattlesnake master, and moon carrot. And as you can see in the previous few images, there's many varying heights, and there's areas for all of these insects, especially bees, to have these little oases to help them cool their bodies down in the heat and exchange microbiology from different plants, almost sort of like pit stops. So we kind of view this as like their flying paths are diversified for better pollination. And although this is still great, this is in Amherst, this is sort of like how we're starting to transform a lot of our sedum only roofs within cities to keep that diversity of flying pollinators unique in a way, instead of just keeping them in Boston Common or the Arboretum and them not really having other places to go without overheating. Creating these other pit stops along the way is one of our goals. And here is blue flax on the left, which we love to see covered in bees. Pollinator insects help columbine on the right cross-pollinate to bring in new genetic material. Without pollinators, these plants end up inbreeding, causing less healthy plants in the long term. And these columbine plants also attract hummingbirds and finches too. A few other species worth mentioning are rattlesnake master, which is Yuccifolium, and wild lupin. Lupin is important for us to see on our roofs too because of the endangered Carner blue butterflies, which feed on this nectar. And when in bloom, rattlesnake master has a few rivals for its ability to attract floral visitors. It attracts bumblebees, yellow-faced bees, sweat bees, multiple beetles, and dozens of fly species regularly visit this plant.
And I wish we had a photo of that in bloom, but I don't think we do on this slideshow. But
I know, I was searching for one of those. Here's some more asters, larger sunflowers, and coreopsis in the back left. What's nice about this roof too is that we continue to see something different blooming here from spring to mid-fall. And luckily now we can watch these larger plant clusters fill in, smothering and shading out the weeds below to help manage them naturally, which is ultimately making them less obvious and abundant. This season, we've continued adding plants, seeding, trimming, deadheading, and monitoring the temporary irrigation setup. And obviously with seasons like the one we've been having this past year, we're actually able to keep the irrigation off. Oftentimes water encourages weeds, so it's a good idea to try and stress your plants to the point where they won't die, but give them just the right amount of water so that you're also not seeing your site overcome with weeds. In addition to pollinator habitats, what this transformation is also doing is connecting biodiversity to resiliency. Our roof in the long run is now going to be more stable and resilient, able to adapt to change in weather, storms, etc. Species richness is the number of different species in an area. An ecosystem with more of these species has a higher species richness. Ecosystems with this higher species diversity tend to be more resilient. So if an ecosystem has a diverse community of organisms, they're not as likely to be affected by a disturbance in the same way. So if one species is nearly killed off, a functionally similar species can take its place, which then maintains the function of that ecosystem as a whole. The pollinator habitat we are creating on this roof is like no other. There are now endless resting spots for bees and insects to make a home in the plants or soil, and it's obvious on each visit that we make there. The challenges we face are minimal, but with more diversity on a roof, the top thing is just kind of having to navigate the roof for maintenance and sort of avoid a lot of these habitats, making sure that we just identify them and move slower. They're now more dense and lush with plant material, and we do have one designated walking path, but there's just so many other plants in other spots that we really navigate slowly around those ones. We also have to show up prepared, so we each have a bee suit on the maintenance team, and prior to getting these, many of us have actually opened up bee or wasp nests within the plants or soil, which didn't end too well. The bee suits are incredible. Insects like praying mantis often affect an environment by feeding on desirable species that we would want up there. And we have to kind of decide if we want to relocate these species or not, and also discourage other non-beneficial insects that try to invade. But the overall benefit to all of this is that interacting with a roof that is buzzing is nicer and more enjoyable for our crews, and it adds an extra dimension to the sensory experience of maintaining a green roof. Butterflies do not move as much pollen as bees do. They latch onto a flower and carry it on their slender bodies, but they don't have any special structures to hold any more than that. They typically prefer flowers that are brightly colored, open during the day, and have clusters as good landing platforms. Bees, on the other hand, spend most of their life collecting pollen. When a bee lands on a flower, the hairs all over the bee's body attract the pollen grains, and stiff hairs on their legs enable them to groom the pollen into specialized brushes or pockets on their legs or body, and then carry it back to their nest. Another approach to building biodiversity and habitat on green roofs is to create microhabitats and variation in the green roof landscape. A couple of examples of this are to incorporate mounds in your soil to allow for diversity of plant health and root depth, or to create simple habitats to have insects, such as putting some logs on your roofs. Beetles bore into these logs, creating a hollow space for overwintering insects. They're a great inexpensive way to promote biodiversity at a number of different levels, as they will help improve soil health through promoting microbial activity. They support insect habitats as an insect hotel, and they provide perches for birds and also areas of shade or moisture for plants. It helps to always think about who you're gardening for. There can be multiple right answers to this question. Is it for the general public and student body in this case? Is it the building aesthetics, the general ecology, the insects, birds, spiders, etc.? On this roof, it's all the above. A traditional sedum extensive roof can always check off all these boxes. Can't always check off all these boxes, but one like this can. While the aesthetic does change in late fall and winter, the habitat does not. At Recover, we don't cut any grasses or perennials back in the fall or winter. These plants can house beneficial insects, allowing them to overwinter in the plant debris or the hollow stems. Butterflies and moths, such as swallowtails, usually overwinter in chrysalids, blending in with leaves and dead stalks in the garden and wild areas. Native bees hide in leaf litter or create underground burrows and stay within just an inch or two of the surface. Some bees use the natural cavities, such as hollow stems from pithy plants and grasses, or tunnels in dead wood created by the feeding beetles to escape the cold. Stem nesting native bees, like mason bees, overwinter and are actually one of the first to emerge in the spring. So letting plant material leaving plant material is crucial for their life cycle. We should all be supporting these insects by creating safe habitats for overwintering and resisting that urge to clean out the garden too early the following spring. If and when bad bugs present themselves the following spring in your garden, you'll also be prepared with your beneficial insects to fight them off. As these plants break down in the winter, they also create a thicker, plant-dense water retention layer, which also allows for an extra filtration system for stormwater management. What can be a challenge is client expectations, if they're sort of a client that wants a cleaner look. But our push as green roof professionals is to educate on why this may not be the best option. We cut back in the spring, or in our meadows, we slowly do cutbacks throughout the spring to emulate what happens in nature, which is like an animal eating or a storm breaking the material down. So to educate the public and our clients on why biodiversity and adding pollinators to green roofs is important is always at the top of our list. As the word spreads, I look forward to seeing more transformations like the one I've talked about today. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Emily. Just kind of rounding things off, couple slides left, but there's a lot in what Emily just mentioned, and I kind of wanted to round it off by sharing this slide, which is an interesting image of a solar green roof or a biosolar roof, which is another way to encourage biodiversity on green roofs and also stack the benefits of solar green roofs or of solar panels and a green roof together. And it has many of the benefits that Emily just described on this roof at Amherst College, sort of in this different context. And this is kind of a new concept within the green roof industry. And the research and installations coming out of Europe are really exciting. And it's really gotten us excited at Recover about the potential here with these solar green roofs. And these roofs really stack the benefits of the two technologies by combining them. And what the research is showing is that solar panels are actually much more efficient when they're installed in tandem with a green roof, and much more productive than solar panels alone on a roof. And this is really due to the plants around the solar panels regulating the ambient air temperature around the solar panels. Solar panels, like other technology, has its optimal operating temperature, and often on really hot summer days, the panels are actually above their optimal operating temperature. And what green roofs do is they actually regulate that naturally. So they provide all that biodiversity. You have habitat creation below the roof's protection. You have different little microclimates. You have areas that are much wetter in the front and drier underneath, more shade underneath, more full sun in the front. And at the same time you're doing that, you're actually making solar panels more efficient. So you're really able to compound the benefits of both systems to really have this like beautiful system of a symbiotic relationship between power generation and green roofs. And so I kind of wanted to end on that note. It's something that's new. It's less common in the US. It's something that is much more common in Europe. And we're really hoping to see more of that as both a way to create more biodiversity, create more efficient green energy, and also kind of combine the two technologies. So we're going to round it off and recap a little bit, and hopefully have a few minutes for Q&As. So kind of in summary, we'll kind of rush through these so we have some time for questions. But really, strategies for improving diversity and pollinator habitats on green roofs. So really intentional design and planning with an emphasis on biodiversity. That should be pretty obvious, but this really applies to green roofs and green infrastructure more broadly. That really requires experts, people who are thinking holistically about green infrastructure. And this also means sort of collaborating with specialists and well-seasoned practitioners. Site appropriateness and with design and plantings. So make sure that our sites are designed appropriately for their location. That can mean native plants. That can mean planting around a building's height or sun exposure, quality green roof systems. Just make sure we're really installing the highest quality green roof systems that we can muster for a project. healthy soil microbiology, something that's often overlooked within the world of green roofs, and something that we think is very, very important. And something that, like on the ground level, without healthy soil, you're not going to have a healthy ecosystem. And the same goes for soil on a green roof. And Emily, you have the next couple, I think.
So especially in a region like New England, most of our natives need some water. So it's important that they're getting the water that they need, especially true during the early days of plant establishment. But once established, we can begin to rely on much less water for them. And always planning for quality and locally grown plants whenever possible. And think about when the plants will bloom to maximize the pollinator food.
Yeah, that's definitely a really important one. And sort of thinking about climate appropriate plantings. So as the climate changes, we need to really think about how our green spaces deal with this new norm, how we're able to incorporate green roofs in a way that it also deals with these new norms and provides those benefits, those continued benefits. Planting for specific endangered or threatened species. This can really range from plants to insects. And that can mean we're planting certain flowers for a certain butterfly, or we're creating insect hotels for insects to burrow in. Connectivity with the surrounding landscape. This is a really important one, and something that really needs to be sort of front and foremost when we're thinking about green infrastructure more broadly, and something that I really think is a really important element of green infrastructure. So that can mean anything from planting plants on a green roof that connects to the ground level plantings. It can mean building facades with greenery, so cascading vines. It can mean adding trellises in and around your green roof to kind of add stepping stones between your green roof and your ground level landscaping. Really, the possibilities are endless.
Also, topographical diversity. It's a great way to increase biodiversity. And this is as simple as creating small waves in the soil or mounding the soil, like I had mentioned, on the green roof to offer that variation in the depth. And we've seen this, we've worked with this on many roofs so far, and even just to approach a meadow or a green roof with these different elevations, it just looks so much cooler. So it's also like aesthetically pleasing and really good for all of the insects.
Yeah, so to kind of round it off, let your green roof evolve, let your green infrastructure evolve, and let nature kind of do its thing, choose its own course, letting the volunteer plants thrive and survive as long as they're not invasive, and then just being creative and seeing where it goes. And on that note, we don't have much time, but this is an image of a beautiful green roof in Malmo, Sweden, a sort of a nativized meadow area with some trees and some grasses and some native plants. So thank you all. I hope you all enjoyed it and learned some things. And if we have a few minutes, happy to answer some questions, happy to stay a little bit late. I'm not sure if that's possible, Renee, but thanks again, everyone.
Emily, Pete, thank you so much. This was awesome. We have lots of questions. I'm looking through to see if they're, oh, okay, let's see. Can you retrofit a building to hold a green roof?
Yes. As I mentioned, green roofs come in all shapes and sizes. A big thing is weight. So if your building can support the weight of a green roof, typically you can find a way to do it. And often there's ways to incorporate green roofs, even if you have very limited weight capacity. So if it's an older structure or building that wasn't designed for that. But yes, definitely retrofitting buildings is a great way to incorporate green infrastructure.
Okay, let's see. Next question. The question was, can you plant straight native species? And Heidi, maybe you can clarify, did you mean straight species as opposed to cultivars, or only native plants? And related to that, do you Recover ever supply host plants for caterpillars? So Heidi, I don't know. Oh, not cultivars. So just entirely, do you ever do just entirely native species?
Straight species. Yeah, we do. And that happens a lot when we're kind of doing these transformations like this. I think what you want to be careful of is just to make sure they're not native plants that are also invasive, which I'm sure you know about the invasive list here in Massachusetts. But yeah, just kind of knowing like the right plant, right place, right function, and how it's going to act up there.
Yeah, and just a quick add to that, there's definitely some benefit to adding some non-natives to some of our roofs that are primarily natives, such as some of these succulents we're describing in the sedum family. They can have sort of a symbiotic relationship around water with some of the natives. So the succulents grow really slowly, they suck up a lot of moisture, and they can actually release that moisture, donate that moisture to surrounding plants during periods of drought. And so that's a kind of a great way to sort of create a balance between the two, even if you're having like a primarily native species roof.
Thank you. Okay, so I think, we can say as late as 6:30. Why don't I do the closing questions? Are you two able to stay a little bit longer for questions?
Sure.
If we come,
Yeah.
I'll just do we have a couple of things to mention, and then anyone who wants to stay, we can stay a little bit later. So
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing then.
yes, sure. Yes, sounds good. Okay, so I have a few announcements. One is we would love to get your feedback about how the session went, and David is going to drop a link for the online evaluation. If you can get to it now, that would be awesome. The sooner the better, so we can get that information. And then the last thing is just a reminder about the auction, about the really wonderful items that you can bid on, and all of the proceeds support our year-round programming and advocacy work. So if you're able to, please bid, and that would be great. And thank you so much, Pete and Emily. This was really terrific, very informative, and I really appreciate you presenting. So with all of that said, I think we can go back to questions. There were, I believe, I caught them all in the chat. One person wanted to know what's under the Harvard 3-tiered green roof.
Say that again.
There was a question about in the Harvard, there's a green roof that had 3 tiers. What is underneath it?
Yeah, I'll may jump back into that photo. It'll be easier to explain. Okay, so let me know. Okay, can everybody see? Oops, can everybody see this photo? Can everybody see the photo?
Yes,
Yeah,
we can see
yeah.
it.
Okay, sorry. I don't when I share my screen, I don't see anybody else's faces. I'm sorry. So this whole building is actually built above. This whole building is, or this whole landscape is essentially a green roof, because the entire, basically, the roadway that surrounds this building delineates the structure. So this whole green area is all over structure. So there's actually a giant basement, and some labs and studios beneath this whole area. And so what's really cool about this building is that, so we have multiple roof levels. This is the upper roof level, which I think is eventually going to have solar on it. And then these lower green roof levels, the upper green roof level below this is classroom spaces and some libraries. And each one of these levels actually drains to the level below. So the water that's captured on this green roof, water that's not used by the green roof, then drains to this level, and then what's not used by this green roof on this level drains to the subsequent level, and then what's not gathered, what's not utilized here, drains to the landscape below. And we actually have the sort of a terraced rain garden or wetlands. So we have a wetland here that then drains to this wetland when it overflows, and then this one drains to the next one, and the next one, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of where the sort of the circular nature of this landscape comes from. There is a giant green space that is just grass in the middle, which is typical Harvard. But really the sort of unique and interesting elements to me are really the sort of perimeter areas around this just giant lawn space. So underneath here is lab spaces and classrooms, libraries, and then underneath here is all basements and other lab spaces and other sort of underground university environments, classrooms, et cetera.
Thank you. Do you have any examples of a land bridge? I think that maybe around here that someone could see or pictures someone could explore. I'm not exactly sure. If
Yeah,
someone,
so there's,
if you're still here and you can clarify this question, please chime in.
Yes, he said it would be great to see a land bridge. And it's like, okay, where do we go find one?
yeah, there's unfortunately, I mean, we don't have many land bridges in New England. I'm not aware of actually any. I think there, I know actually there are a few in New Hampshire. There's actually quite a few land culverts in New Hampshire, especially in the White Mountains, and I think in the Green Mountains too in Vermont. But in terms of these sort of like magnificent land bridges, in the US, as far as I know, you really have to go west. So I had an image which I actually pulled from my slideshow. I don't think can't pull it up right now, but it said Banff National Park. There's some in the Rockies. The land bridge that I showed is from the Middle East somewhere. So they're pretty few and far between in our region of the world. There's a lot of them in Germany and Austria. And actually in Germany, Austria, they've kind of gone above the sort of land bridge concept and are actually sort of doing just underground highways. So they're kilometers of highway, or just burying them underground and then having just green space and green roofs above them, kind of connecting those landscapes, kind of like a more naturalized big dig, so to speak. But yeah, I'm unfortunately I don't have any great examples. I could be wrong. There could be a few around, and I think Google could probably answer that. But
Okay, thanks. But it's the land bridge is the term.
land bridge is the term, yeah. They're called a few different things, land bridges and sort of animal passes. I've been calling them land bridges, so whatever that's worth.
Thank you. Another question is, what is the downside of clover and black medic on a roof?
Yeah, we get this a lot. A lot of people ask, if you have a lot of weeds on your roof, why don't you just leave them? And in a lot of our meadows, we actually do, but in this particular setting, we didn't want these weeds to outcompete the more desirable species or sort of be like a host for any sort of fungal disease. But the number one thing just being they were starting to just strangle everything that was up there. And if we just let it go, the whole roof was just going to become that. So when we start seeing the patches get so big, we have to really reduce them down. But I would say we've definitely leaned away on almost all of our roofs from, trying to feel like we have to get rid of every single weed, because I think that having some weeds is okay.
And can I add something to that too? So I think one of the things that's really different about a green roof than a ground level landscape is that you don't really have animals munching on your landscape. So at ground level, you're going to have some things eating your clover, your black medic type of clover, your rabbit's foot, all of these different things. On a green roof, it's really the management teams that are up there acting as that sort of like munch. And so you really have to kind of think about that when you're thinking about management of a green roof. And as Emily said, if we have a monocrop of a rabbit's foot clover that just takes over and takes over and takes over, that photo that we saw of a maintenance practitioner kind of getting ready to weed, that was right in full bloom. But a month later, if we had only rabbit's foot on that roof, it would just look like a desolate landscape, because once that stuff dies back, it really dies back. And so that really also allows for more invasives to come in. On this roof, we actually had some more serious invasives that I think were probably working symbiotically with the rabbit's foot. And so kind of thinking about it holistically and really thinking about it as a sort of it is an engineered landscape, and we really have to think about it that way, that unfortunately, until we have sort of bridges that allow for larger animals to kind of get up on green roofs, we're going to have to act as sort of those animals that kind of come in and eat that foliage through sort of removal of it.
So you need rooftop rabbits is what you're saying.
Basically, if we could have some rooftop rabbits, that would help quite a bit. And there's actually there's a roof in Berlin that has goats on it. There's a couple of roofs around the world that have goats. There's been a few rooftop farms that have chickens that roam, some goats, some areas that have like rabbit areas. A lot of clients are really hesitant to have those sort of animals on their rooftops, unfortunately.
The only other question I think there is, and if I have missed a question, please raise your hand or just unmute yourself, is from Jan. And Jan, maybe you can clarify. The question is, what is the book? And I'm not sure what that's referring to.
Probably the book Recovering America. Maybe this book. We were talking about the name Recover came from Malcolm Wells, an architect, and the book is Recovering America. It's about building with nature. And he's passed away, but he was a native of Cape Cod. So maybe this is the book that we're referring to. Highly recommend it. Really interesting.
All right, thank you.
So if anyone else has a question, feel free to just speak up or raise your hand.
Yeah, I was wondering, what if you think that your building can't support the weight of a roof garden? There's nothing you can do about it, right?
Structurally, you could essentially beef up the structure of your roof to support the green roof. I think in New England, if your roof's been holding snow, that's a good sign. And kind of getting an assessment is sort of the first thing, especially for a smaller residential building that doesn't necessarily have a structural assessment when it was built. But definitely,
this is a condo. There's 13 units in it, and
okay,
part of the roof is flat.
Yeah, I think in those cases, typically having somebody review the construction documents, the architectural documents can give a lot of information about what the roof can support. Most commercial buildings in the New England area can support a green roof. It might not be as sort of deep or robust as we might want, but we can have green roofs that are as shallow as like a couple inches and still can support some really diverse roofs or some diverse plant palettes. So it's depending on the building, it can be really complicated to support the structure. If it's a simple building, then it can be sort of potentially simpler to do that. But I would say the first thing is doing that assessment. And if you want to reach out, I'm happy to share my contact information. I could sort of point you in the right direction for that assessment, or we can help you out with that.
Okay, great. Can it get put in the chat or?
Yeah, I'll put my email in the chat right now.
Great, thank you.
Mabel, do you have a question?
This is Mabel who's been talking.
Sorry.
Okay.
I have a question. What is the highest, most stories up that you've seen pollinators on a green roof?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I was on a roof last spring in Chicago. It was, I think, 80 stories up. And there's really not much up there when it comes to pollinators. There's been a lot of research on sort of how height influences pollinator habitat, or how height impacts pollinator habitats. And it's definitely true that the higher up you get, the lower percentage, or the fewer insects you're going to have on your roof, and also the fewer pollinators you're going to have on your roof. So 70 stories up is kind of extreme. But Emily, maybe you could comment on some of our taller roofs in Boston and how we've sort of interacted with pollinators on some of those roofs.
Yeah, it kind of makes me think about 222 Berkeley, that Pete showed the photo of the bare roof, the soil being blown in, and then the sedum shot. That one, we have started to really diversify the sedum mix. So there's the 4-foot band along a glass railing that we go out on for maintenance. And it was sort of a monoculture of sedum there, but we've mixed in a lot of different types. And the more that I go up there, the more bees I'm definitely seeing on the sedum there. And they have about 20 planters along a window on the interior of the deck. And that area is, there's a lot of opportunity there to keep adding things in, but it's just so hot because of the reflectivity. There's maybe 5 or 6 more stories above this level. So there's so many hot windows like reflecting down on those planters. So we don't see much there. But if
that's-
you can really diversify a shallow sedum mix, I think you can still see quite a few native bees like we have up there.
And that's
20
how many
stories?
stories?
That one's 20.
20.
Have you done any like stepped up, like if there's a building that's, 10 stories and next to it it's 12, and you think that could get them higher, or is there just maybe a maximum height they can really go?
I think it's a sort of a mixture of, yes, there's probably ways to sort of terrace your green roofs to allow for more pollinators, but I think this is really anecdotal, but from what I've read, you do kind of max out, and also just the environment gets really harsh. Like in Chicago, for example, I mean, this building was on the lake, unbelievably windy. It was a fairly shielded area of this building. We were hundreds of feet up, and it's unbelievably hot. The wind is unbearable, and I think it's just many factors that would kind of contribute to that. And there definitely are more research on this these days. So I think maybe if you asked us in a few years, we might have some better answers. But it's something that we, as sort of sensing technology gets more sophisticated, AI identification apps, AI generative cameras, essentially, so you can sort of like have cameras on things that will pick up what's there, movement, insects, flowers. We're going to have a lot more information on what is doing well on our roofs, and sort of how to promote that, I think. So not that I'm all for this technology necessarily, but it's definitely some interesting stuff coming out there about like having sensors that can, cheap sensors that you can have remotely on a roof that can gather a lot of information about temperature and other things, and you can kind of correlate that to wind speeds and photographing pollinators on your roof to kind of build the database. So it's definitely an evolving thing, but I think we know that taller up the building is, regardless of whether it's stepped or not, and regardless of where it is in the world, you're going to have less insects.
Raptors, maybe.
Yeah, maybe raptors, but definitely a lot of birds of prey. I mean, there's I had a little picture of a bird of prey, which was superimposed in this image, but we have a lot of birds of prey on some of our roofs, and it's very common on green roofs all over the world.
Well, I think we've hit our time, Max, unfortunately, but thank you so much, Pete and Emily. This was great. For those of you still here, we were recording this, and so we will at some point, I'm not exactly sure when, but you'll get a notification that the recordings are ready for viewing. And Pete and Emily have both put their emails into the chat, so I think they're welcoming questions. And thanks to everyone for attending.
Thanks. Do you know when the recordings are available? Will the chat be visible?
I am not sure. That's a good question. I think that Zoom does record the chats.
Okay, so I'm just thinking, so like, I've got Peter and Emily's email addresses here, but I don't know if someone was wondering if someone viewing this later would be able to grab that info, just as an example.
Yeah, I think that is the case, and it'll only be available to anybody who's already a conference attendee. So basically,
Sure.
anybody
Yeah.
can be.
Understood. Yeah.
You
Okay.
can always email us,
Mhm.
and I can connect you with them too. So
Okay. Cool. Thank you so much. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Emily. This was great.
Thank you.
Thanks,
you all.
everyone.
Good
Have a good night.
Thanks.
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 Bye.
Bye.